ArrivalThe morning fog clung to the trees like a secret. Cool and damp, it curled through the branches of the ancient forest, whispering around moss-covered trunks and fallen leaves. Birds called tentatively, as if unsure whether it was truly safe to sing. Somewhere deep in the woods, a man stumbled through the underbrush. His name was Thomas Galloway, though few in the nearby towns remembered him. He was a stonemason by trade, a wandering craftsman who moved from village to village, carving beauty out of rock, then vanishing like wind across the moors. He had no family, no home to return to, just a bag of chisels, a hammer, and the rough calluses on his hands. But this morning, his steps were no longer firm. Blood stained the side of his tunic, darkening the coarse wool. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, and with every step pain lanced through his shoulder. A fall, perhaps, or the wild boar that had charged him the night before in a blur of tusks and rage. He didn't know where he was. The forest stretched endlessly around him, deeper than any he'd dared before. The trees here were ancient, their twisted limbs thick with lichen. The sunlight was pale and green when it filtered through, but now even that was fading. His legs buckled. He fell. For a moment, all was still. Then soft footsteps on leaves. A girl appeared through the mist. She wasn't what he expected. Not a woodcutter's daughter or a passing hunter. No, she looked more like something from an old tale, wrapped in a moss-green shawl, her chestnut hair braided down her back, a satchel of wild herbs slung across her shoulder. Her eyes, large and amber, widened as they fell upon him. She dropped to her knees beside him. "You're hurt," she whispered, more to herself than him. He tried to speak, but only managed a groan. Without hesitation, she reached for his face, her fingers cool against his fevered skin. "You need to come with me. You won't last long in this forest." He blacked out again as her voice drifted into a hum, a quiet lullaby that sounded like running water and summer wind. When Thomas opened his eyes again, he was lying on a bed of straw and soft wool. A clay jug of water stood by his side, and the smell of crushed mint and rosemary filled the air. His shoulder throbbed, but it had been carefully wrapped. Sunlight poured in through a small window made of rounded glass, casting golden circles on the stone floor. For the first time in weeks, he felt warm. The girl entered quietly, a wooden bowl in her hands. "You're awake," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I wasn't sure you'd survive the night." He tried to rise, but she gently pushed him back. "Don't! You tore a muscle near your shoulder. It'll take time." "Where am I?" he rasped. "In my home," she said, "just outside the village of Elders Hollow." He frowned. He'd never heard of it. "It's not on most maps," she added. "People who find it are usually meant to." There was a twinkle in her voice that made him unsure whether she was teasing or simply telling the truth. "I'm Eleanor," she said. He nodded. "Thomas." "Well, Thomas," she said, offering him the bowl. "Eat. It's rabbit stew. And don't even think about arguing. I've dealt with more stubborn patients than you." Despite his pain, a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. As the days passed, Thomas remained in Eleanor's cottage, tucked between a wildflower meadow and the edge of the woods. It was simple, but full of life. Herbs hung from the rafters, and wild bees visited the open windows. Eleanor worked with care and calmness, her fingers always busy mashing roots, boiling teas, binding salves. At tea night, they sat by the fire. She told him stories about the valley, how the land once belonged to an old clan, how a stone bridge long buried by vines once connected the two halves of the village, and how the town had slowly begun to vanish from memory. "No one stays anymore," she said one evening, staring into the fire. "The bridge collapsed after the great rains. Without it, the village split. Now there's barely 2 dozen of us left." Thomas sat in silence, the flamelight catching the edges of his face. "I build bridges," he said softly. She turned to him, eyes curious. "What do you mean?" "I'm a stonemason. My father taught me before he passed. I've spent my life repairing what others leave behind." Eleanor's expression shifted: surprise, wonder, perhaps something deeper. "Maybe," she said slowly. "You came here for a reason." Connection. The days grew longer, ripening into spring. Thomas, though still weak in the arm, found strength in motion. The ache that once clung to his bones had begun to lift, replaced by a growing need to do. He was not a man built for idleness. So once he could stand without wavering, he began to wander farther from Eleanor's cottage, exploring the edges of the valley. Eleanor walked beside him each day, pointing out the names of herbs and flowers with the soft joy of someone who had always spoken with the land. "That's Lady's mantle," she said, crouching beside a fan like leaf still wet with dew. "It catches the morning water like a bowl. Old women say it's where the fairies drink." Thomas crouched beside her. "You believe that?" "I believe the forest keeps secrets," she replied with a mischievous smile. "And we're better for not knowing all of them." As they walked, she plucked leaves and stems with care, dropping them into her basket. Thomas asked questions, surprising himself. He had never cared for plants or potions before, but there was something in the way she touched the earth as if she was a part of it that drew him in. That afternoon, they came upon the broken remains of the old stone bridge. It spanned the shallow creek that split the valley in two, or at least it once had. Now, its center had crumbled into ruin. Vines clung to the sides, and moss softened its edges, but the gap in the middle was wide, jagged, and impassable. Eleanor stepped beside him. "This is the bridge I told you about. It connected both sides of Elders Hollow north and south. When it fell, families stopped crossing. The northern side is nearly abandoned now. We used to gather there for festivals, weddings, everything." Thomas walked forward and laid his hand on one of the remaining stones. They were rough, but still strong. The arch supports had mostly held. The foundation, though sunken, hadn't fully given way. "It can be rebuilt," he said softly. Eleanor turned to him, unsure. "Truly, with time, and patience, and with you," he thought but did not say. "The next day," he began, though his arm still ached when he lifted too much. Eleanor helped where she could, bringing water, holding stones in place, even learning how to mix mortar. She watched his hands, marveling at the precision with which he chipped and placed each stone. He worked not with haste but with reverence, as though each stone had a name, a weight, a place in the story. In return, she taught him. He learned that comfrey could soothe bruises, that feverfew calmed headaches, that wild thyme, when brewed with honey, could ease the breath in winter. At first, he joked, calling it witchcraft with flowers, but over time, he began to appreciate the beauty of it all. How the forest gave freely to those who asked kindly. Sometimes they talked while they worked, other times they didn't need to. Their silence grew warm, shared like bread between them. In the golden afternoons, Thomas would glance over at Eleanor as she sat weaving baskets in the sun, her braid brushing her shoulder, her hands quick and graceful, and he would feel something stirring inside him that no road, no city, no contract had ever brought. One evening, after a long day of hauling stones, they sat together by the creek. The moon was rising, fat and full, and its reflection danced on the slow-moving water. "Why did you stay here?" he asked. Eleanor plucked a reed and twirled it between her fingers. "Because it's my home. Because no one else would keep the old ways alive. And because it's beautiful. You could have left, found more people, a bigger town, and done what? Opened an apothecary in a place where no one believes in wild cures." She smiled faintly. "No, this place still listens. The land breathes here. And now that you've come, I don't feel quite so alone." He looked at her, then really looked. She wasn't the sort of beauty that would make heads turn in a marketplace. But she had something deeper, a steadiness, a quiet light. He reached out, took the reed from her hand, and wove it into a ring. "It's not much," he said, "but if I asked you to stay by the bridge tomorrow to help me set the keystone, I would," she whispered. It took 6 more weeks to finish the bridge. By then, Thomas could use both arms fully, and Eleanor knew the names of every stone. The entire southern side of the village gathered the day they placed the final piece, a long arching slab that completed the structure like a promise. It held. The villagers gasped and cheered. Children ran across the bridge, their laughter echoing through the valley. For the first time in years, people from the north side emerged from their cottages, hesitant at first, then joyful as they embraced old friends. Elders Hollow had been whole before. Now it felt alive, and at the heart of it stood a stonemason with mud on his boots and an herbalist with her hands stained green, and a bridge that would one day carry generations. Conflict the summer in Elders Hollow came like a slow burning song, warm winds that rustled the barley fields, fireflies that blinked in rhythm with the night. With the bridge now complete, life stirred again. Markets reappeared, festivals returned, even the old church bells rang once more. Though their chimes were softer from years of silence, Thomas and Eleanor were no longer just names in the village. They were the reason it breathed. But peace, as Thomas had learned in his many years on the road, is never a permanent guest. It began with a letter, delivered on parchment thick with wax, the seal stamped in red. the mark of Baron Alaric Ventmore, a name spoken only in whispers in the countryside. Elder William, the village's oldest voice, read the message aloud beneath the town's oak tree while the villagers gathered around. To the inhabitants of the valley known as Elders Hollow, by rights of ancient claim and through newly acquired interest, the lands you occupy shall be purchased, cleared, and restored to noble estate. A private hunting preserve shall be established by winter. Each family shall receive compensation upon immediate vacating of property. Refusal to comply will result in legal and physical action. Signed, Baron Ventmore of Thistlemark. A stunned silence fell, then murmurs, protests, panic. They can't do this, can they? We just rebuilt the bridge. My grandfather planted our orchard with his bare hands. Where would we go? Eleanor stood stone still. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. We're not leaving. Heads turned toward her. We've healed this land. We've rebuilt it. This valley breathes again because of all of you. And no amount of gold or law can buy what roots itself in love. Thomas stood beside her, saying nothing, but already war stirred inside him. That evening, Eleanor and Thomas sat on the bridge they had rebuilt. The creek below whispered as it always had, untouched by wealth or war. I won't go, she said, staring into the water. I'd rather die on this land than see it sold to some man in silk who's never touched its soil. Thomas said nothing. She looked at him sharply. You're quiet, he exhaled. I've seen what men like Ventmore can do, Eleanor. I've worked in towns that burned because of men who wore crowns on their fingers. You can't fight them with firewood and poetry. So, what do we surrender? No, he said, but we must be smart. Brave doesn't mean blind. Eleanor looked away, her jaw tight. You've always had a road to return to. I don't. This valley is my beginning and my end, and you're mine, Thomas whispered. But if I stay and get taken, if Ventmore sees me as a threat, he won't stop with threats. He'll send soldiers. He'll tear this place down. She reached for his hand. You once said you build what others leave behind. Don't leave this behind, Thomas. Don't leave me. The next morning, a horse-drawn coach arrived in Elders Hollow, bearing the red banner of Thistlemark. The Baron had come in person. His arrival was grand, his clothes too fine for mud, his boots too polished for farmland. He looked upon the village like a man inspecting livestock. I'll be brief, he declared. This land has value. It is mine. Now, you may stay, if you wish, some of you as gardeners, groundskeepers, servants. Those who resist will be removed. His words lit a fire in Eleanor's chest. We are not weeds to be trimmed, she said, stepping forward. This valley has stood for centuries. Its people are its blood. You'll take none of it without a fight. The Baron laughed coldly. Ah, the healer, the bridge girl. I expected as much. Then his eyes turned to Thomas. And you, stonemason. I know men like you, drifters. Sell your skill to the highest bidder, then vanish when the trouble begins. Here's my offer, gold. Enough to vanish again. Leave the girl and save yourself. Thomas clenched his fists. The offer wasn't tempting, but it was revealing. This man didn't understand love. No, he said. I've wandered all my life, but I've never seen a place worth standing for until now. Ventmore's smile dropped. Then you'll fall with the rest. That night, the village gathered under the stars. Lanterns glowed around the oak tree. Children sat on laps. Elders leaned on canes. Fear lingered, but so did something else resolve. Thomas stood before them, hands calloused, voice steady. We have a choice, he said. Run or build. He pointed to the bridge in the distance. You remember what it looked like. Broken. Forgotten. And now, it holds again. Just like this village can. He looked at Eleanor. We may not have an army, but we have stone. We have earth. We have each other. Eleanor stepped forward, lifting her voice. We will resist. Not with blades, but with roots. We'll make it impossible to tear us out. We'll replant the north. We'll reopen the old granary. We'll raise walls not of fear, but of memory. Cheers broke out, soft at first, then louder, fuller, until the valley rang with a courage it hadn't known in decades. For the first time, Elders Hollow chose to stay and stand. Climaxed, the days that followed were unlike anything Elders Hollow had seen in generations. The entire village moved like one body, bound by resolve. Men sharpened tools and hauled timber from the forest. Women patched the cracks in old cottages, turning broken walls into barricades. Children ran errands, fetched water, and carved whistles to signal danger through the trees. The bridge once A symbol of history now became the heartbeat of a defense they didn't know they could build. At the center of it all stood Thomas. He no longer looked like a traveler. His shoulders were broad from the weight of stone, and his voice carried like thunder through the hollow. Each morning, he led the work crews. Each night, he walked the perimeter with a torch in hand, marking where the brambles needed thickening, where the slopes needed reshaping. But it wasn't walls alone that strengthened Elders Hollow, it was Eleanor. She moved from home to home, checking on the sick, bandagging scraped hands, brewing stronger teas as the nights grew colder. She taught mothers how to make poultices from yarrow and mugwort, and taught the children how to recognize which mushrooms would feed and which would poison. There was strength in her quiet ways, a different kind of armor. One morning, as mist clung to the hills, a rider galloped into the village from the northern woods, his horse foaming at the mouth, his cloak bearing the red mark of Baron Ventmore. "Please," the rider gasped. "Help! The Baron's daughter. She's fallen ill-fevered and fading fast. He sent me for the healer." The villagers stiffened. Eleanor stepped forward. "You want help from the woman your Baron threatened to evict?" "I beg you," the rider said, falling from his horse. "No one else can save her." There was a long silence. Then Eleanor turned to Thomas. "Saddle to horses." He blinked. "You're going? She's a child. She didn't choose this. And if there's a soul in need, I go." He saw it in her eyes, the unflinching light that made him love her more than breath itself. "Then I'm going with you." Baron Ventmore's estate sat on a distant hill, cloaked in stone and ivy. Guards tensed as the two riders arrived, but when they saw Eleanor dismount with her satchel, they led her in at once. Inside, the grand halls were cold and empty, ornate, but lifeless. In a lavish bedchamber, the girl lay sweating, her lips pale and cracked, her breath shallow. The physician standing beside her looked desperate. "She's been like this for 2 days," he admitted. "No treatment has worked." Eleanor stepped forward. Her hands moved with quiet urgency as she examined the child's pulse, checked her tongue, lifted the sheets. Then she looked up. "She's not just fevered. She's been poisoned accidentally, I think. Something ingested in the woods." Monkshood, perhaps. Everyone in the room blinked. Even the Baron, who stood by the window with his arms folded, his face gray with worry. "Can you save her?" he asked. Eleanor nodded once. "If we act quickly." She crushed charcoal and elderberry, brewed a tincture with boiled honey, applied a cooling poultice to the girl's chest. For hours, she worked, while Thomas stood by the door, watching the girl's chest rise and fall with trembling breath. As dusk fell, the fever broke. The child stirred, murmuring faintly, "Papa." The Baron crossed the room in 2 steps, falling to his knees beside her. "She's alive," he whispered. He turned to Eleanor, eyes wet with disbelief. You've done what none of my doctors could." Eleanor looked tired, but her voice was clear. "She needs rest and fresh air, not marble and velvet." The Baron stood, silent for a long moment. Then he looked to Thomas. "You built the bridge, didn't you?" "I did, and rallied the town against me." "I did that too. Then why?" "Help us." Thomas didn't answer. Instead, Eleanor stepped forward. "Because what you tried to take, Baron, was never just land. It was people, and people are not to be bought or pushed away. Even you know that now." The Baron bowed his head. "No one has ever spoken to me like that, and perhaps," Eleanor said gently, "that's the problem." The next morning, the Baron arrived in Elders Hollow on horseback, but this time without guards, without threats. He asked to speak beneath the old oak tree. "I came to take," he said to the gathered villagers, "and found myself the one in need." He turned to Eleanor and Thomas. "This valley is not mine. It never was. The land belongs to those who love it. And love, I've learned, is not something that can be taxed or measured." He reached into his coat and tore the deed in 2. "I release all claim." The village erupted into stunned silence, then tears, applause, disbelief. As the Baron rode away, his daughter in his arms, Elders Hollow felt as if it had been reborn again. This time, not by stone, but by mercy. Part 5, Resolution. First. Rain of autumn fell soft and steady over the valley, kissing the fields of wheat and the stone path that now curved gracefully from one end of Elders Hollow to the other. But it was no longer called that, not anymore. A new wooden sign was placed at the village entrance, and carved by Thomas himself and polished to a gentle sheen. On it, a single word, Elmsworth, named for the ancient elm trees that lined the stream, and for the worth of the people who had protected it with heart, not hate. In the months after Baron Ventmore's withdrawal, the valley transformed. Those who had once spoken of leaving now planted roots with certainty. The bridge became more than a crossing. It became the site of dances, of trade, of stories shared under lantern light. Children skipped across it with flowers in their hair. Elders sat beneath its arch to rest and remember. The village had found its soul, and at its center were Eleanor and Thomas. Their love had unfolded slowly, like spring, patient, steady, and blooming when the time was right. There was no grand proposal, no theatrics. One crisp morning, as the sun rose behind the hills, Thomas simply took Eleanor's hand near the bridge and said, "Let's make this forever." She nodded. "I already have." Their wedding was held under the great oak tree, the same place the Baron had once read his threat, and where the villagers had once trembled in fear. Now it echoed with laughter and song. Eleanor wore a gown stitched with ivy green thread, the color of the forest that had first brought them together. Thomas wore a tunic of simple flax, his hands stained with the dust of the new schoolhouse he'd helped build earlier that week. Elder William officiated with a voice thick from joy and age. "You brought stone to bind us," he said to Thomas. "And you, Eleanor, brought the healing that made us whole. Together, you didn't just save Elmsworth, you gave it a beginning." As they exchanged vows, the villagers lit candles along the bridge, one for each family, each birth, each memory. By nightfall, the whole crossing glowed like a golden ribbon, and when Thomas and Eleanor walked across it, hand in hand, the villagers cheered as if it were not just a marriage but a coronation of love. Years passed, children were born, trees were planted, and the seasons turned with grace. Eleanor became known as the Heart of Elmsworth, not because she cured every illness, but because she never let anyone feel unseen. Her remedies were legend, but her listening ear was her true magic. Thomas, now older, trained young apprentices in the art of masonry. "A stone is not just a tool," he would say. "It's a witness. Treat it like a story, and it will hold." Together, they watched Elmsworth grow, one house, one heart at a time, and though neither of them ever sought it, the villagers built a statue by the bridge's entrance many years later, a carving of two figures standing side by side, one with a satchel of herbs, the other with a hammer in hand. Beneath it, an inscription, "In stone and root, they built us. In love, they saved us." Thomas and Eleanor, founders of Elmsworth. Part 6. Legacythe. Morning mist still rolled across the fields of Elmsworth just as it had 100 years ago, weaving through hedgerows and curling softly along the stream. Children still raced across the stone bridge at dawn, chasing each other with laughter like bells in the wind. Lanterns still hung from its arches during festivals, glowing like stars turned upside. Lovers still carved initials into its railing, the wood worn smooth by generations of hands, promises, and passing time, but few who walked its path truly knew how it all began, except one. Her name was Clara Whitmore, a girl of 15 with ink-stained fingers and a heart full of questions. She lived in the old cottage at the edge of the village, the one with herbs still growing wild near the door, where ivy curled up the walls like a cradle of green. It had once belonged to Eleanor. Clara was Eleanor's great-great-granddaughter, and she had always felt it, somehow, that the bones of her home were made of more than stone, that its air carried stories. She spent her afternoons in the village library, tucked in a quiet corner beside the fireplace, poring through records, journals, and old letters bound with ribbon. Among the pages, she found sketches of bridges, hand-pressed herbs still faintly fragrant, and a letter written in faded brown ink that read, "Love is not something you own. It is something you build day by day, stone by stone, and if you are lucky, it outlives you." It was signed Eleanor of Elmsworth. The town, now thriving with cobbled streets and flowering windowsills, had changed with time, but not in soul. The people still met under the great oak tree for council. They still honored spring with a planting ceremony on the North Hill, once abandoned, now fertile and rich. And they still called the bridge the Heart of Elmsworth. Clara, walking across it one evening at sunset, looked at the statue standing nearby, two figures carved in stone, facing each other with quiet strength. One held a hammer, the other a sprig of wild mint. She reached out, brushing her fingers across the words engraved below, "In stone and root, they built us. In love, they saved us." Her eyes softened. She didn't remember their faces, of course, but she felt them. Every path she walked, every kindness given by the townsfolk, every home warmed by love and memory, it all echoed from Thomas and Eleanor's first steps together. Later that week, Clara took a notebook and sat by the stream. The bridge rose behind her like a memory carved into the land. The sun filtered through the elms, and for a moment, the air was golden. She began to write. Once, a wandering stonemason came to a hidden valley. He was broken and searching. There, a healer found him and gave him not just medicine but belonging. Together, they rebuilt what time had broken, and through their love, a village was born. Clara paused, her pen resting above the page. Then, in bold letters, she wrote the title, The Stone Bridge of Elmsworth, a True Love Story, and somewhere in the air, though no one could hear it but the wind, the stones whispered back, they remembered, and they always would, the end.